Okay, thank you very much, Kim, and thank you very much, James, for this excellent start of the session. I assume you all see and hear everything correctly, so I'll kick off with my talk, which is a part of the integrated landscape management story. It's about landscape governance, and it starts with recognizing that today's global problems really, really require bold global solutions. And I think there's no need for you to explain why. There are bold solutions being proposed currently. We have the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and lots of pledges to restore the world's ecosystems in the next 10 years with 1 billion hectares and trillion trees and God knows how many dollars that are to fund all this. And in general terms, a landscape approach has been adopted as landscapes are considered the best level for handling all sort of complicated trade-offs. But there are questions remaining, like where to restore and what to actually restore and how to restore. Who decides on what to restore, where, and for whom actually? And that's where landscape governance comes in. And I'm very happy to see that landscape governance as a concept has raised attention over the past few years. It almost seems to have become the new silver bullet to balance production and consumption and protection in a single space. And then increasingly, it is a sort of acknowledged or recognized that stakeholder engagement in this governance process is actually important and fairly easy. You know, you set up a platform or you constitute a partnership and then everything will be fine. But how easy is that really? So that's actually the reason why in Wageningen, together with the CIFOR, we studied a research on landscape governance. We studied a couple of cases where landscape governance has not been introduced externally, but was already on the ground sort of intrinsically. And we studied public-led governance in Rwanda, where it's attempted to combine restoration with food production. We also studied West Kalimantan, as many of you actually, where a private-led governance arrangement is implemented through multifunctional concession design, and another a civic-led governance arrangements that many of you already know. That's in Latin America, in the Amazon, transboundary social learning, a very great case that you are familiar with. Based on these case studies, we defined landscape governance as a place-based, multi-level and multi-stakeholder process of negotiation and decision-making for sustainable land use to balance the production, the protection, and the consumption needs of actors involved. Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay, landscape governance, based on that definition, we studied it can be manifested in many modes, in multiple, in public-led arrangements, in private-led arrangements, in civic-led arrangements. And actually, in all three cases, these different arrangements tend to overlap and coexist and evolve over time. They evolve, and now look at the graph, they evolve from single to multi-actor-led governance arrangements. And that trend that we saw over time is actually partly largely driven by levels of degradation, the drivers of degradation, general trends of democratization and decentralization. And it tends to
Frances.
Oops, somebody needs to be muted here. In all the cases, we encountered multiple challenges. First of all, substantive challenges. That's the challenge that relates to the landscape itself. Droughts, floods, degradation, deforestation, you name it. But we also encountered process challenges. And these process challenges are closely related to what was raised before, how to get stakeholders on board and balance power relations and really embark on a democratic governance process. We realized after some probing that these challenges are actually mostly connected to a scale mismatch between jurisdictional scales, you know, a village, county, region, country, etc., versus a landscape logic or a landscape scale, a biogeographical scale. And that means that political power And place-based or people's power tends to be separated, and that's not very practical. We see, however, that many local actors in all the cases did not sit and wait for problems to be solved. They undertook their own action and created landscape arrangements, place-based, socially accepted, and assumingly ecologically sustainable. Yet, where we saw these spontaneous arrangements, we also saw that these arrangements often remain informal. They remain, how you call it, in the shadow of hierarchy. I'm borrowing some authors, some of you here, and they are searching. They lack the legitimacy that they would need to make their outcomes last. Okay, that's the challenge. Now, what do these stakeholders do to overcome this challenge? Actually, a lot. They develop horizontal pathways. We saw that in all the cases. They blend customs with contemporary rules. They design integrated land use. They do all sorts of things to comply and fit in existing rules. But they do more. They also create or develop vertical pathways. That is, they connect to higher level officials, to national governments, and then even higher up, international fora such as the GLF, which help them to not only be creative within the rules, but also to stretch the rules and finally transform the rules by creating these clever networks across hierarchies. Well, now that is, I think, where we start talking, because that actually shows how landscape governance, if cleverly operationalized, can bridge between this scale divide, between the landscape logic and the administrative logic. But it's not crafted by researchers or by outsiders or by funders. It's created by creative and entrepreneurial landscape actors who actually craft committees, partnerships, all sort of arrangements to that may start informal and legitimatized by social acceptance and the landscape sustainability, but that do manage to reconnect people and place. I'm almost done, don't worry. This looks great, but it requires some capabilities. So that's then the last stretch of what we did, finding out what are the capabilities that actually are needed by landscape actors to bridge these skill divides. First of all, substantive capabilities plus process capabilities that relates to the challenges, you remember. But besides that, also the institutional capabilities to connect institutions and to create these cleverly designed networks across levels and scales. The capability to do things differently and to engage in platforms and realms of connection where they did not do that before. The capability to engage, also to listen and to respect. And that's not done through teaching or through training, no way. It can only be done through the development or even the mobilization of meta capabilities, landscape capabilities for landscapes to collectively learn. This is actually the rough design behind GLF's Landscape Academy that is strongly rooted in this image. Now, the future of landscape governance, where we may have a debate, I strongly believe that the future of landscape governance lies in the reconfiguration of governance, that is, not staying within jurisdictions, but moving from jurisdictions to landscapes, which is a much better fit in many countries of this world where borders are actually artificial constructs. So from jurisdictions to landscapes, but that implies that there are new sources of legitimacy needed for these landscape arrangements, legitimacy that goes beyond the classical democratic structure of states. I also believe that the future is to move again. We moved from the community level to the landscape level. Now, I believe what is needed is to move from landscape level to wider political economies. So the positioning of landscapes within what is currently called stewardship economies, which I believe is a great concept, and it gives a space for landscape approaches to be even more effective. It makes them thrive. And oops, and all that to be achieved by creating spaces for actors to connect, to learn, to join hands, and something that while I work with the GLF, I see that as a great model for that. And that would, I think, be underpinned with one thing, moving away from antithesis, thesis, antithesis, so all the time creating a new hype, to really to build synthesis and build upon landscape approaches, build upon landscape governance, and furthering the thinking and further building to make this world a better place. And herewith, I hand over back to the moderator. Thank you.